Put your hands where I can see them right now. Officer Ryan Keller's voice cracked across the rainy Savannah sidewalk like a siren bouncing off wet concrete. People near the pharmacy entrance stopped mid-step. A mother pulling a stroller froze beside the newspaper stand. Two teenagers under the flickering bus stop light lowered their phones slowly, sensing something turning ugly before they even understood what was happening. Dorothy Brooks stood near the automatic doors, clutching a small brown paper bag against her chest, rainwater dripping from the edges of her gray cardigan. At 74 years old, she looked smaller than the storm around her, her silver curls damp against her forehead, her trembling fingers tightening around the prescription medicine she had just picked up. The glowing red and blue lights from Ryan's patrol SUV washed over her face in uneven flashes. "Sir," she said softly, her voice nearly swallowed by the rain. "I already paid for the medicine." Ryan stepped closer anyway, boots splashing through shallow puddles near the curb. He had been having the kind of shift that made every nerve feel exposed. Dispatch calls stacked back to back. Complaints from his lieutenant. A viral video last month that put the entire department under pressure. Now all he saw was another situation slipping out of his control. "Then why did the cashier say you walked past the register confused?" he snapped. Dorothy blinked behind her fogged glasses. "Because I forgot my receipt on the counter." Her answer came calm, polite, almost painfully gentle. That somehow irritated him more. The pharmacy manager stood awkwardly near the sliding doors, holding a receipt printer in one hand. "Officer, I think maybe there's just been a misunderstanding," he muttered carefully, but Ryan barely looked at him. Rain tapped against the hood of the patrol car. Somewhere down the block, thunder rolled low over the Savannah River. Dorothy shifted her weight slowly, one hand pressed lightly against her chest, as if steadying her breathing. "My heart medication is in the bag," she whispered. "I just want to go home." Ryan noticed the crowd growing. Faces under umbrellas. Car headlights. Slowing along the intersection. Phones starting to rise. The pressure twisted tighter inside him. He reached toward the paper bag abruptly, and Dorothy instinctively pulled it closer to herself. The movement lasted less than a second, but Ryan reacted immediately. "Don't resist me," he barked. The sharpness in his voice made several people flinch. Dorothy looked stunned. "I wasn't resisting." Her words trembled now. Ryan grabbed her wrist hard enough for the paper bag to slip free. It hit the soaked pavement, and orange prescription bottles rolled through the rainwater toward the gutter. One stopped beside a storm drain, while another spun in slow circles beneath the glow of the patrol lights. A little girl standing beneath the pharmacy awning gasped quietly. Dorothy bent down carefully, her knees visibly shaking. "Please," she whispered. "Those are important." Ryan reached for her arm again, trying to pull her upright too quickly. Dorothy lost her balance against the slick sidewalk. Her glasses slipped sideways as she stumbled against the side of the police SUV. A sharp silence spread through the crowd. Not loud silence. The heavy kind. The kind where everyone suddenly realizes they're watching a moment that will not disappear once it's over. Rainwater rolled down Dorothy's cheek like tears she refused to let fall. She steadied herself against the cold metal of the vehicle and slowly looked up at Ryan. Her eyes were tired, but there was dignity in them that somehow made the entire scene feel worse. Then, with trembling fingers, she reached down toward the wet pavement and picked up a worn leather wallet that had fallen from her coat pocket. As it opened slightly beneath the flashing lights, something inside caught the attention of the young cashier standing near the doorway. It wasn't money. It wasn't an ID. It was an old military photograph beside a bronze trident insignia worn smooth with age. And beneath it, barely visible under the rain, were 4 engraved words. "My son came home." The rain kept falling long after the crowd stopped moving. Water streamed along the curb beside the pharmacy parking lot, carrying cigarette butts, leaves, and reflections of flashing patrol lights through the storm drain. Dorothy Brooks remained near the side of the police SUV, one frail hand resting against the cold metal while she tried to steady her breathing. Her cardigan sleeve was soaked through now, clinging to her wrist as tightly as the trembling in her fingers. The young cashier slowly crouched near the fallen wallet, his eyes fixed on the old military photograph still peeking from the leather fold. "Officer," he said quietly, almost unsure if he should speak at all, "I think maybe you should look at this." Ryan Keller turned sharply, irritation already sitting heavy on his face. "Look at what?" The cashier held up the photograph carefully between two fingers so the rain would not damage it further. The image was faded around the edges, worn soft by years of being opened and closed. A younger Dorothy stood smiling beside a tall man in desert camouflage, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. Metals lined the front of his uniform. A gold trident pin gleamed beneath the water droplets sliding across the plastic cover. Ryan recognized the insignia immediately. Navy SEALs. His jaw tightened slightly before he looked away. Does not change anything, he muttered. Dorothy lowered herself carefully onto the wet curb beside the patrol vehicle. She moved slowly, like every inch of her body carried old pain that never fully left. One hand pressed against her chest while the other reached for the prescription bottle floating near the gutter. The little girl under the awning suddenly stepped forward despite her mother trying to stop her. She paid already, the child said again, louder this time. Her small voice cut cleanly through the rain. I saw her pay. Several heads in the crowd nodded quietly. Someone near the back whispered, there are cameras inside. Another phone lifted higher. Ryan noticed all of it. The whispers. The lenses pointed at him. The shift in the crowd. His shoulders stiffened beneath the damp uniform as he tried to pull control back into his voice. Everybody needs to back up. But nobody moved much now. The pharmacy manager finally walked out into the rain holding a crumpled receipt in his hand. Water soaked the paper almost immediately. Officer Keller, he said cautiously. The transaction went through. She did pay for the medication. A heavy silence followed. Dorothy closed her eyes briefly, not in victory, not even in relief, but exhaustion. Rain tapped softly against her glasses while the city traffic hissed through the intersection nearby. Ryan stared at the receipt for a long moment before speaking. Then why did she walk away confused? Dorothy answered before anyone else could. Because old hands and old minds do not move as fast anymore. Her voice stayed gentle. That somehow made the moment hurt worse. Ryan looked at her differently for the first time. Not as a suspect. Not even as a problem. Just old. Tired. Human. But pride is a stubborn thing once an audience forms around it. He cleared his throat roughly. Ma'am, if there was confusion, then you should have cooperated from the beginning. Dorothy gave a faint smile that did not reach her eyes. Young man, she whispered. Being afraid is not the same thing as refusing. The words settled over the crowd like another layer of rain. Ryan opened his mouth to respond, but the distant sound of helicopter blades suddenly rolled across the dark Savannah sky. Low, heavy, approaching fast. Several people looked upward instinctively. Headlights appeared at the far end of the street moments later, black SUVs moving steadily through the storm with military precision. The flashing patrol lights reflected across their windshields as they slowed near the pharmacy entrance. Dorothy looked up slowly at the sound, and for the first time that night, warmth touched her face. Not fear. Recognition. One of the SUV doors opened before the vehicles fully stopped. A tall man stepped out wearing a dark dress uniform beneath a rain-soaked coat, his posture straight even under the pounding storm. The silver eagle pinned near his collar caught the streetlight as he scanned the crowd once. Then his eyes landed on Dorothy sitting alone on the curb. The rain seemed quieter the moment the man stepped out of the black SUV. Not because the storm had weakened, but because every eye near the pharmacy shifted toward him at once. He moved with the kind of stillness people only carried after years of discipline. Tall, broad-shouldered, controlled. Water rolled from the edges of his dark coat as polished black shoes crossed the flooded pavement toward the curb. The silver trident pin near his collar caught the patrol lights again, bright against the storm-dark street. Dorothy Brooks looked up slowly from the curbside, her tired eyes softening the instant she saw him. Marcus, she whispered. The man's expression changed immediately. The controlled military calm vanished for half a second beneath something deeply personal. Concern. He dropped to one knee in front of her, without caring about the rain soaking through his uniform pants. Mom, he said gently, his voice low and steady. What happened? Dorothy tried to smile for him, but her lips trembled from the cold. I am all right, baby. Marcus glanced at the wet prescription bottles scattered near the storm drain. Then his eyes moved upward slowly toward the red mark near Dorothy's cheek and the crooked glasses barely hanging against her face. The silence around the parking lot thickened. Officer Ryan Keller suddenly became very aware of the phone's recording from every angle now. Marcus reached into his coat pocket and unfolded a clean handkerchief with careful hands. He wiped rainwater from Dorothy's glasses first before placing them back properly on her face. The gesture was small, quiet, but somehow it pulled every ounce of attention in the street toward him. "Can you stand?" he asked softly. Dorothy nodded faintly. Before helping her up, Marcus noticed the military photograph still lying partly exposed inside the soaked wallet beside her. He picked it up carefully. Water dripped from the corners while his thumb brushed across the faded image of himself standing beside his mother years earlier. For a brief second, his jaw tightened. Not anger exactly. Something deeper. Hurt. Ryan stepped forward finally, trying to regain control of the scene before it slipped completely away from him. "Sir," there was confusion regarding a possible theft situation. Marcus looked at him for the first time. Calm eyes. Measured eyes. The kind that revealed almost nothing. "A theft situation," he repeated quietly. Ryan cleared his throat. "Your mother appeared uncooperative during questioning." Several people in the crowd exchanged looks immediately. The cashier lowered his eyes. Even the little girl near the awning frowned. Marcus glanced down at Dorothy again. "Mom," he said gently, "did you steal something?" Dorothy looked almost embarrassed by the question itself. "No, sweetheart." Marcus nodded once. That was all. No dramatic reaction. No shouting. Just complete belief. He helped her stand slowly beneath the rain while another SUV door opened behind him. 3 men in dark military jackets stepped out and stopped several feet away, instantly scanning the area with quiet alertness. One of them moved toward Marcus with an umbrella, but Marcus lifted a hand slightly without looking back. "Not now." Dorothy noticed the gesture and touched her son's sleeve softly. "Do not make trouble," she whispered. Marcus looked down at her with tired affection. "I am trying very hard not to." The crowd heard it. So did Ryan. Somewhere nearby, thunder rolled again above the Savannah rooftops. Marcus bent carefully to collect the prescription bottles himself, placing each one gently back into the paper pharmacy bag. Rainwater dripped from his fingers onto the sidewalk, while the military officers behind him remained silent. Finally, Marcus stood upright and faced Ryan fully. "Officer," he said calmly, "my mother has lived in this neighborhood for 38 years. She volunteers at St. Andrew Baptist every Tuesday. She bakes peach cobbler for half this block every Christmas. And tonight she came here for heart medication." Ryan shifted uncomfortably beneath the stare of both the crowd and the cameras. Marcus took one slow breath before speaking again. "So I need you to explain to me very clearly why she was sitting alone in the rain beside your vehicle looking afraid." The question landed harder than shouting ever could. Ryan opened his mouth, but no words came immediately. The flashing patrol lights painted red and blue across Marcus's wet uniform, while Dorothy stood quietly beside him, holding the paper medicine bag against her chest like something fragile. Then from somewhere near the crowd, an older man spoke under his breath. "That officer picked the wrong woman tonight." And suddenly the entire parking lot felt different. The rain finally began to soften, but the tension in the pharmacy parking lot only grew heavier. Water dripped steadily from the edge of the awning, while patrol lights painted slow flashes across the puddles beneath everyone's feet. Officer Ryan Keller stood rigid beside his SUV, shoulders tight beneath his soaked uniform shirt, feeling the weight of every phone camera pointed in his direction. Across from him, Marcus Brooks remained completely still. No raised voice. No threats. Somehow that calm unsettled Ryan more than anger would have. Dorothy held the paper bag close against her chest, while Marcus adjusted the collar of her cardigan gently to shield her from the cold wind blowing through the street. "You are freezing," he murmured. Dorothy tried to dismiss it with a small smile. "I have been colder." Marcus looked at her for a second longer than necessary. The words carried history between them. Long nights. Hard years. Sacrifices neither of them ever fully talked about. One of the military men standing near the SUVs quietly stepped forward. "Commander Brooks," he said carefully, "the ceremony downtown starts in 40 minutes. Marcus never looked away from his mother. "Then they can wait." The officer nodded once and stepped back immediately. Ryan noticed that too. The respect. The instant obedience. The kind earned, not demanded. Somewhere near the crowd, someone whispered, "That is Marcus Brooks?" Another voice answered quietly, "Bronze Star. Navy SEAL commander. Saw him on the news last year." Ryan's stomach tightened. The little girl near the entrance tugged lightly on her mother's sleeve. "Mom," she whispered, "why is everybody scared now?" Her mother glanced toward Dorothy before answering softly. "Because people are realizing they judged the wrong person." The words drifted farther than she intended. Ryan heard them clearly. Marcus finally turned his attention back toward him. "Officer Keller," he said calmly, "did anyone here threaten you tonight?" Ryan blinked slightly. "What? Did my mother threaten you?" Marcus repeated. "Did she attack you? Refuse instructions? Attempt to run?" Rainwater slid slowly from Marcus's jawline while he waited for an answer. Ryan glanced briefly at the watching crowd before speaking carefully. "She appeared confused and non-compliant during an active investigation." Marcus gave the faintest nod, almost like he expected the answer. "Confused," he repeated quietly. Then he looked toward Dorothy. "Mom, what day is it?" Dorothy frowned softly. "Thursday. And what did you cook yesterday?" "Sweet potato pie for Miss Clara next door, because her husband is in the hospital." Marcus nodded once more before facing Ryan again. "Seems clear enough to me." A few people nearby exchanged uncomfortable looks. The pharmacy manager lowered his head entirely now. Ryan shifted his stance, trying to regain some authority. "Sir, with respect, you are not seeing the full situation." Marcus's expression never changed. "Then help me understand it." Ryan inhaled slowly. "There have been theft reports in this area. Elderly suspects are sometimes used as distractions." Dorothy looked wounded for the first time. Not angry. Hurt. Marcus noticed instantly. His jaw tightened subtly before he crouched beside her again. "Do not carry that," he said softly. "His suspicion belongs to him, not you." Dorothy's tired eyes glistened beneath the streetlights. "I taught you that when you were little." Marcus smiled faintly despite the storm around them. "You taught me most things worth knowing." The crowd fell even quieter after that. Ryan suddenly felt painfully aware of how different this moment looked from where he stood now. Not dangerous. Not threatening. Just a son protecting his elderly mother with dignity most people in the parking lot had not expected. A distant siren echoed somewhere downtown, while thunder rumbled farther out near the river. Then another police cruiser slowly pulled into the lot. Its headlights swept across the gathered crowd before stopping beside Ryan's SUV. The driver's door opened, and a gray-haired captain stepped out into the drizzle with a tense expression already forming on his face. He had clearly seen enough of the live-stream videos spreading across half the city during the drive over. Captain Ellis adjusted his rain cap once before looking directly at Ryan. "Officer Keller," he said heavily, "step aside with me. Right now." Ryan's face tightened instantly. Marcus remained silent beside Dorothy while the captain's eyes moved briefly toward the elderly woman holding her medication bag against her chest. Something in his expression changed immediately. Recognition, then regret. "Miss Brooks," Captain Ellis said quietly, "I think we owe you a conversation." The parking lot no longer sounded like a normal Thursday night in Savannah. The rain had faded into a soft mist, but dozens of phones still glowed beneath the pharmacy awning while passing cars slowed near the crowded curb to see what was happening. Blue patrol lights reflected across the wet pavement like broken glass. Captain Ellis stood near Dorothy Brooks with water dripping from the brim of his cap, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and embarrassment. "Miss Brooks," he repeated quietly, "I did not realize you were involved." Dorothy gave a tired smile. "I did not realize I needed to be recognized to be treated kindly." The words landed harder than any accusation. Marcus lowered his eyes briefly after hearing them, almost like he had heard his mother carry disappointments like this his entire life. Captain Ellis exhaled slowly and glanced toward Ryan Keller, who stood several feet away beside the patrol SUV, jaw tight, hands resting near his duty belt. "Officer Keller," the captain said firmly, "I asked you to step aside." Ryan hesitated before finally walking over. The crowd shifted slightly to hear better. One of the teenagers near the bus stop whispered, "This is going viral already." His friend tilted the phone screen. Hundreds of comments were pouring across the live stream. Some angry, some shocked, some simply asking who the elderly woman was. Ryan lowered his voice once he reached the captain. "Sir, I followed protocol." Captain Ellis looked exhausted suddenly, older than he had a minute earlier. "Protocol?" he repeated quietly. "You left a 74-year-old woman sitting in the rain beside your vehicle over a paid prescription." Ryan glanced toward Marcus and Dorothy before answering carefully. I responded to suspicious behavior. The captain's eyes hardened slightly. And when the receipt was found? Ryan did not answer immediately. Silence stretched between them while the crowd watched every movement. Nearby, Marcus gently adjusted the paper bag in Dorothy's hands to keep the medicine dry. He never interrupted, never inserted himself into the conversation. Somehow that restraint made Ryan more uncomfortable than confrontation would have. Dorothy looked up at her son softly. "You should not miss your ceremony because of me," she whispered. Marcus gave a faint shake of his head. "There will be other ceremonies." His voice stayed calm, but exhaustion sat underneath it now. The kind built from years of deployments, sleepless nights, and carrying responsibility heavier than most people would ever understand. Dorothy reached up and brushed rainwater from his sleeve like she used to when he was a boy. "You always say that." Marcus smiled slightly. "Because medals do not sit beside you when you grow old." Captain Ellis noticed the exchange. So did everyone else. The humanity of it spread quietly through the parking lot, dissolving some of the fear and tension that had hung there earlier. Ryan stared at the ground briefly before muttering, "I did not know who she was." Marcus heard him this time. He finally looked over fully, rain still dripping from the edges of his coat. "That is the problem," he said calmly. "You thought her value depended on that answer." The words cut through the parking lot with terrifying precision. Ryan opened his mouth, then stopped. There was nothing easy to say against a truth spoken that plainly. One of the officers standing near the SUVs lowered his eyes. Even Captain Ellis looked away for a moment. Dorothy touched Marcus lightly on the arm. "Baby," she whispered gently, "do not carry anger home with you." Marcus looked down at her, and for the first time that night, emotion cracked faintly beneath his discipline. "I am trying not to carry fear home with me," he admitted quietly. Dorothy's expression softened immediately. She understood what he meant. Fear that next time she could be alone. Fear that no cameras would be watching. Fear that kindness alone no longer protected elderly people in neighborhoods they had spent decades helping build. The captain removed his rain cap slowly and faced Dorothy directly. "Miss Brooks," he said carefully, "there will be an internal investigation regarding tonight." Dorothy looked almost saddened by the sentence itself. "Young man," she replied softly, "I am too old to need revenge. I just want people to remember that being afraid does not make someone guilty." A long silence followed. The flashing lights reflected in puddles around everyone's shoes while wind carried the smell of rain and wet asphalt through the parking lot. Then, somewhere near the edge of the crowd, the little girl who had defended Dorothy earlier stepped forward, holding something small in her hand. It was one of Dorothy's prescription bottles she had quietly picked up from beneath the SUV tire. She walked carefully across the wet pavement and placed it into Dorothy's hands without saying a word. Dorothy smiled warmly at her. "Thank you, sweetheart." The child looked up at Marcus afterward and whispered, "Is she really your mom?" Marcus glanced toward Dorothy before answering softly, "She is the bravest person I know." The crowd slowly began to thin after the little girl handed Dorothy the prescription bottle, but nobody truly left. People lingered beneath umbrellas and storefront lights, pretending to check phones while quietly watching the scene unfold near the patrol cars. The storm had passed farther east now, leaving behind damp streets that reflected every flashing blue light across the Savannah sidewalks. Dorothy sat carefully on the edge of the pharmacy bench while Marcus draped his coat over her shoulders despite the cold rain still soaking through his own uniform. The heavy fabric nearly swallowed her small frame. "You will catch pneumonia standing out here dressed like that," she murmured softly. Marcus gave a faint smile. "You used to say that every winter before school." Dorothy looked down at the sleeves of the coat resting around her hands. "And you never listened." The words carried warmth strong enough to soften even the hard edges of the parking lot around them. Captain Ellis stood several feet away speaking quietly into his radio, while Officer Ryan Keller remained beside the patrol SUV alone now, his posture rigid but noticeably smaller than before. Without the shouting, without the authority, without the momentum of accusation, he looked less like power and more like a man trapped inside a terrible moment he could no longer control. Marcus noticed him staring occasionally toward Dorothy, not with anger anymore, something closer to shame. One of the military officers approached Marcus carefully. "Commander Brooks," he said quietly, "the mayor's office called twice already. They are delaying the Veterans Gala until you arrive." Marcus rubbed rainwater from the back of his neck slowly. Tell them to begin without me. The officer hesitated. Sir, the entire event is for you. Marcus looked toward his mother sitting quietly beneath the pharmacy lights. No, he replied softly. It is supposed to honor service. The officer followed his gaze toward Dorothy and fell silent. Nearby, the cashier stepped nervously out from the pharmacy doorway holding a small white paper bag. He approached Dorothy slowly like he was afraid to interrupt something sacred. Miss Brooks, he said carefully. The manager asked me to give you these. Dorothy blinked. Honey, I already paid. I know, the cashier answered quickly. It is just tea. Chamomile. For the cold. Dorothy looked surprised for a second before smiling warmly enough to make the young man visibly relax. That is very thoughtful. Marcus watched the exchange quietly. Then he reached into his pocket and handed the cashier a challenge coin engraved with a Navy insignia. The young man stared at it with wide eyes. Sir, I cannot take this. Yes, you can, Marcus said calmly. You spoke when staying quiet would have been easier. The cashier closed his fingers around the coin carefully, like it weighed far more than metal. Across the parking lot, Ryan watched the moment too. His face tightened slightly. He had spent years believing authority came from force, volume, and command presence. Yet somehow the man standing 20 feet away controlled the entire scene without raising his voice once. Dorothy slowly opened the tea bag and looked inside before chuckling softly. Oh my! Marcus glanced down. What? Dorothy held up a small honey packet. You used to steal these from diners when you were little. Marcus looked almost offended. Borrowed. Dorothy laughed quietly for the first time that night. The sound was soft, tired, beautiful. Several people nearby smiled without meaning to. Even Captain Ellis turned slightly after hearing it. Ryan lowered his eyes toward the wet pavement. Something about that small laugh hurt more than the accusations online already spreading across the city. It reminded him that before tonight, Dorothy Brooks had simply been an elderly woman buying heart medication before going home. A normal life interrupted by fear and assumptions. Marcus crouched beside his mother again, while steam slowly rose from the cup of tea warming her hands. Did you eat dinner? He asked. Dorothy avoided his eyes immediately. Marcus noticed. Mom. She sighed softly. I was waiting for you after the ceremony. Marcus looked down briefly, emotion flickering behind his calm expression. You should not wait that long anymore. Dorothy touched his cheek gently with cold fingertips. Mothers wait. It is what we do. A long silence settled between them after that. The patrol lights kept spinning across the puddles. Wind carried the smell of rain and wet pavement through the nearly empty parking lot. Then Captain Ellis approached slowly, holding a tablet in his hand with a grim expression spreading across his tired face. Commander Brooks, he said quietly, you need to see this. Marcus stood and took the tablet. On the screen, security footage from the pharmacy played silently beneath the streetlights. Every second of the misunderstanding, every hesitation, every witness trying to speak, every moment Dorothy looked frightened. And standing alone beneath the flashing patrol lights, Ryan Keller suddenly had to watch himself through everyone else's eyes for the very first time. The parking lot had grown almost quiet by the time Marcus lowered the tablet from his hands. Only the soft spin of patrol lights and the distant hiss of tires passing through wet Savannah streets broke the silence now. Rainwater clung to the edge of the screen, while the paused security footage reflected faintly across Marcus's face. Captain Ellis stood beside him with both hands resting heavily on his belt, looking like a man carrying the weight of a conversation he never wanted to have. Dorothy sat beneath the pharmacy awning holding the warm teacup between her palms, her silver curls still damp beneath the yellow light overhead. Ryan Keller remained several feet away near the patrol SUV, but he could already feel something shifting around him. The crowd was no longer looking at him with curiosity. They were looking at him with recognition. Not of authority. Of failure. Marcus replayed part of the footage silently. Dorothy standing confused at the register. The cashier trying to explain. The little girl speaking up. The medicine bottles scattering into rainwater. Every moment looked smaller on camera than it had inside Ryan's adrenaline-filled memory. Smaller. Meaner. More human. Marcus finally handed the tablet back to Captain Ellis without a word. Ryan swallowed hard and stepped forward cautiously. Commander Brooks, he began, but Marcus lifted a hand slightly. Not aggressive. Just enough to stop him. Do not speak to me yet, Marcus said quietly. The calmness in his voice somehow made the entire parking lot go still again. Ryan nodded once and lowered his eyes. Marcus turned instead toward Dorothy and walked back beneath the awning. He crouched beside her slowly, one forearm resting across his knee while steam rose from the teacup warming her hands. "Mom," he asked softly, "did he scare you?" Dorothy hesitated before answering. "Not at first." Marcus looked down briefly. That answer hurt more than anger would have. Dorothy noticed immediately. "Baby," she whispered gently, "do not let this harden your heart." Marcus gave a tired exhale through his nose. "You taught me to protect people." "Yes," Dorothy replied. "But protection and punishment are not always the same thing." Captain Ellis looked away after hearing that. Even the officers near the SUVs shifted uncomfortably beneath the glow of the parking lot lights. Ryan stared toward Dorothy with growing disbelief. After everything that had happened, she still sounded more concerned about what this moment would do to others than what it had done to her. Marcus sat beside his mother on the bench finally, shoulders heavy with exhaustion. "Do you remember," Dorothy asked quietly, "when you were 14 and came home angry after that boy called me names outside the grocery store?" Marcus gave the faintest smile. "I broke his bicycle." Dorothy pointed lightly at him with one finger wrapped around the teacup. "And then what happened?" Marcus looked toward the wet pavement. "You made me apologize." "No," Dorothy corrected softly. "I made you understand." The crowd listened without meaning to. Even passing drivers slowing near the intersection rolled windows down slightly to hear the conversation spreading online in real time. Dorothy touched Marcus's hand gently. "Pain travels fast in this world already," she whispered. "Somebody has to stop carrying it forward." Ryan felt something sink inside his chest hearing those words. For the first time that night, the uniform on his body no longer felt protective. It felt exposed. Captain Ellis finally stepped toward him slowly. "Officer Keller," he said quietly, "turn off your body camera and hand me your badge." Ryan froze for half a second. The parking lot became so silent the sound of rain dripping from the pharmacy sign suddenly seemed loud. Ryan unclipped the small camera from his chest first. Then his fingers moved toward the badge pinned above his pocket. Metal clicked softly as it came free. He placed both items into the captain's hand without argument. Somewhere near the back of the crowd, somebody exhaled shakily. Marcus never looked up during any of it. He remained seated beside his mother while she held the teacup carefully between wrinkled hands that had spent decades cooking meals, folding church programs, writing birthday cards, and raising a son strong enough to go to war without losing his humanity. Ryan stared at Dorothy for a long moment before finally speaking. His voice sounded smaller now, stripped of command. "Miss Brooks," he said quietly, "I was wrong." Dorothy looked at him gently through her repaired glasses. "Young man," she replied softly, "being wrong is part of being human." Ryan's throat tightened slightly. Then Dorothy added the words that broke whatever pride he still had left. "But forgetting someone's dignity is a choice." The flashing patrol lights finally dimmed as Captain Ellis switched off Ryan Keller's cruiser. Without the spinning blue reflections cutting across the pavement, the pharmacy parking lot suddenly looked ordinary again. Just wet concrete, rain-soaked shopping carts, a flickering street lamp buzzing softly above the bus stop bench. Yet nobody standing there would forget the night that had unfolded beneath those lights. Dorothy Brooks sat quietly under the awning with Marcus beside her while the remaining crowd lingered near the storefront windows, speaking in hushed voices now instead of outrage. The storm clouds were beginning to break apart overhead, revealing thin ribbons of moonlight beyond the drifting mist above Savannah. Ryan remained standing near the curb with his empty uniform shirt darkened by rain. Without his badge attached, something about him looked unfinished. Smaller somehow. Captain Ellis tucked the badge carefully into his coat pocket before stepping away to handle calls pouring into dispatch from city officials, reporters, and internal affairs. Marcus glanced toward Ryan briefly before returning his attention to Dorothy. "Can you walk to the car?" he asked softly. Dorothy nodded. "As long as you stop hovering over me like I am 90. Marcus almost smiled. "You are 74. "Exactly," she replied. "Still dangerous." A few people nearby laughed quietly, the tension easing for the first time all evening. Marcus stood and carefully offered her his arm. Dorothy accepted it with slow dignity, leaning against him lightly as they stepped away from the bench together. The little girl from earlier waved shyly from beside the pharmacy doors. Dorothy smiled warmly back at her. You keep speaking up when something feels wrong, she called gently. The child nodded immediately. Her mother looked emotional hearing it. As Marcus guided Dorothy toward the black SUVs, Ryan suddenly stepped forward again. Not aggressively, hesitantly, like a man unsure whether he even deserved another word. Miss Brooks, he said quietly. Dorothy stopped walking. Marcus's posture tightened slightly beside her, but he remained silent. Ryan swallowed hard before continuing. I know saying sorry does not fix tonight. Rainwater slid slowly down his forehead while he searched for the right words. But I need you to know, I have been replaying everything in my head since the moment your son arrived. Dorothy studied him carefully through the soft yellow light spilling from the pharmacy windows. Ryan looked exhausted now. Not physically, spiritually. I saw fear where there was none, he admitted quietly. And I forgot my job was supposed to protect people. Marcus watched him without expression. Ryan glanced toward him briefly before lowering his eyes again. Commander Brooks, he said, you had every reason to humiliate me tonight. Marcus answered calmly. No, my mother taught me something more difficult than humiliation. Ryan frowned slightly. Marcus stepped closer, his soaked military coat hanging heavily from his shoulders. Restraint, he said quietly. Anybody can make another person feel small. Real strength is choosing not to. The parking lot fell silent again after that. Even the officers near the SUVs stood perfectly still. Ryan looked genuinely shaken by the words. Dorothy reached into her cardigan pocket slowly and pulled out the old handkerchief Marcus had used earlier to wipe her glasses dry. She folded it once before gently placing it into Ryan's hand. Keep this, she said softly. Ryan looked stunned. Miss Brooks, I cannot. Yes, you can, Dorothy interrupted gently. Because tonight should stay with you longer than embarrassment. Ryan stared down at the cloth resting in his palm, rainwater soaking into the faded fabric edges. For a second, his composure cracked completely. I do not know how to undo this, he admitted quietly. Dorothy touched his arm lightly. Then do better tomorrow. Simple words. No anger. No revenge. Somehow that mercy hurt him more than punishment ever could. Marcus opened the SUV door carefully for his mother, while one of the military officers stepped aside respectfully. Dorothy paused before getting in and looked back toward Ryan one final time. Young man, she said softly. Authority means very little if people are afraid of your presence instead of safe because of it. Ryan lowered his head completely. The lesson landed with the full weight of truth now. Marcus waited until Dorothy was seated comfortably before closing the SUV door gently. Then he turned toward Captain Ellis one last time. Take care of your people, he said calmly, before fear teaches them the wrong way to wear that uniform. Ellis nodded heavily. I understand. Marcus climbed into the SUV beside his mother as the engine started quietly. The convoy slowly pulled away from the pharmacy under the glow of wet streetlights while the remaining crowd watched in complete silence. Ryan stayed standing alone beside the empty patrol car holding a soaked handkerchief in one hand and the memory of Dorothy Brooks's kindness in the other. By the time the black SUVs crossed the bridge toward Dorothy Brooks's neighborhood, the storm had completely passed over Savannah. The streets still glistened beneath the city lights, but the sky above had opened into deep midnight blue streaked with drifting clouds and pale moonlight. Inside the vehicle, warmth slowly returned to Dorothy's hands as she sat wrapped in Marcus's heavy military coat. The paper bag holding her medicine rested carefully in her lap beside the untouched chamomile tea. Marcus sat beside her quietly, one arm stretched along the seat behind her like he had done years ago during long drives home after church when she used to fall asleep in the passenger seat. Neither of them spoke for several blocks. The silence between them no longer felt heavy, just tired, human. Dorothy finally glanced toward her son. You missed your ceremony. Marcus looked out the window at the passing streetlights reflected across the river. I was where I needed to be. Dorothy smiled softly at that. The convoy slowed as they entered her small neighborhood, lined with old oak trees draped in Spanish moss. Porch lights glowed warmly through the darkness while wind moved gently through hanging branches still dripping rainwater onto cracked sidewalks below. It was not the kind of neighborhood people wrote articles about. No luxury gates. No perfect lawns. Just modest homes filled with ordinary lives that had survived hard years quietly. The SUV stopped in front of Dorothy's small white house with the faded blue shutters Marcus had painted himself when he was 17. One of the military officers stepped out first to open the door, but Dorothy waved him off gently. "Honey, if I can survive raising Marcus Brooks, I can climb out of a car myself." The officer laughed softly and stepped back. Marcus helped her carefully onto the porch anyway. The old wooden boards creaked beneath their feet, while cicadas hummed somewhere in the warm Georgia night. Dorothy paused at the front door and looked toward the American flag hanging beside the porch light. Rainwater still dripped slowly from its edges as it moved softly in the wind. "Your father used to straighten that flag every morning before work," she said quietly. Marcus nodded. "I remember." Dorothy reached into her purse for her keys, but her hands still trembled slightly from exhaustion. Marcus gently took the keys from her and unlocked the door himself. Warm light spilled across the porch from inside the house, revealing framed family photographs lining the hallway walls. Marcus in football pads at 16. Marcus in dress whites at graduation. Marcus hugging Dorothy after returning from his first deployment, both of them crying too hard to hide it. Dorothy stepped inside slowly and stopped near the kitchen table. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon candles and old books. Safe. Familiar. Home. Marcus set the medicine bag carefully on the counter before noticing a peach cobbler covered neatly with foil beside the stove. "You cooked today?" he asked. Dorothy removed her glasses and rubbed her tired eyes. "You were coming home." Marcus stood still for a moment after hearing that. All the medals, all the ceremonies, all the years overseas. Yet somehow the thing that nearly broke him tonight was a homemade peach cobbler waiting in a quiet kitchen after midnight. Dorothy sat slowly at the table while Marcus poured her a glass of water. Through the open window above the sink, distant sirens still echoed faintly from downtown Savannah, but they sounded very far away now. Dorothy looked at her son carefully beneath the soft kitchen light. "Promise me something," she said quietly. Marcus pulled out the chair beside her. "Anything." Dorothy folded her hands together gently. "Do not let tonight convince you the world is only cruel." Marcus lowered his eyes briefly. Dorothy reached over and touched his hand. There was also a little girl who spoke up for a stranger. A cashier who showed kindness. A crowd that finally listened. Marcus looked at her and slowly nodded. "You still see the good first." Dorothy smiled faintly. "That is how people survive long enough to become old women." Outside, the porch light cast a soft glow across the wet front steps while the American flag moved quietly in the warm night breeze. Inside the small kitchen, Marcus finally took a bite of the peach cobbler his mother had baked for him hours earlier. Dorothy watched him with tired eyes full of peace while the silence between them settled gently into something neither medals nor uniforms could ever give.